leadership is acutely sensitive to context. We asked leaders in development to discuss how they have adapted their leadership approach to different development contexts.
In 2003, I was commissioned by the Commonwealth Government to do a major piece of work for their interdepartmental review of primary health care in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. And a number of communities across the country were selected as the sites for that project, and they were very different. You know, from the Torres Strait Islands in the north of Queensland, which are a different subculture of the Australian Indigenous culture, and a geography that presents itself with isolated island communities, to the central desert of Australia, where there were very small communities, some 100 kilometres apart, very traditional communities that I hadn't previously worked in, and I knew what I didn't know. And I think that's one of the really good traits of a leader too, to be able to know what they don't know and be able to express that. And it's not a deficiency, it's not a weakness. And so I also, as a female, was pretty challenged by two females driving in very remote desert conditions, without GPS, without mobile phones at the time, and all the other sort of modern infrastructure that supports work in these contexts. So I think there were different cultural issues, there were different geographic issues, there were different political issues, because the local governance structures and the way in which governments, state and federal, position urban communities and remote communities creates a different thinking about how you work in some of those settings. So for me, I really had not worked across such a wide range of settings on one project before, and I can't say that I had a single methodology for doing it.
Leadership must be acutely sensitive to context, and probably the example that I'd like to give has been, in some countries, the role of women is obviously really quite different than we see it in our country. And I'm reminded of an experience I had a number of years ago when I was on a 6-person mission to Pakistan, and 5 of the team were men, and then I was female. And Pakistan, as you may know, is not a country that necessarily values women in leadership positions, and there are a lot of constructs that make it difficult for women to operate effectively in that environment. And you know, what I found that I needed to do in order to be effective for the team outcome was put away my own ego and my own sense of, you know, needing to be able to be a woman, actualising myself to saying the team outcome needs to be this. If I'm trying to promote myself in a situation where a lot of the Pakistani senior bureaucrats were not comfortable with me, then I'd be jeopardising, you know, the outcomes of the mission. So, for example, they weren't comfortable shaking my hand, they weren't comfortable looking at me in the eye. In the early days of the mission, if I asked a question, they wouldn't answer me, they'd answer one of the men. So I spoke to the team leader and I said, look, this is not going to work if I am trying to play this role in the team. I need to become your kind of eyes and ears and watch and listen and talk about the dynamics in the room and come back and sort of reflect with you on what I think was going on in the conversation and where it's going. So I completely changed my role, not trying to assert myself in an inappropriate way culturally, but still doing something that was of value to the work that we were doing.
So recently I was working on a governance platform that we were trying to launch in Mongolia. And so that was really interesting for me, coming from Australia, where, you know, it's very easy for us to criticise the government. We feel like we have, you know, a very active and participatory democracy. And then moving into a context like Mongolia, where the political process is very relationship-based. It's very, very different to the way that we see a free and transparent democracy working. And so we wanted to launch this platform that would basically enable citizens to be more critical of the government and have more of an individual say on the way that things were working. It was the way that we had to get around that was just by leveraging the relationships that we had within the government. We needed to be building relationships with people and using that as a way to sell the benefits of this platform to the government and the parliament, and basically, find a way to tell them that it was the best way to be working. And the benefits of that were amazing. We managed to roll out the platform nationally, and it's a part of their democratic process now that Mongolian citizens can vote on legislation that goes through the parliament. It's just that the way of working was quite different to what we were used to, just because we're so used to be able to say anything that we want about the government at any time.
2 years ago, in 2004, we start education project in Papua. As you know that Papua are totally different situation, different geographical, different people with other places of Indonesia. So we have a lot of experience in Java and Sumatra to help district administrator and also school to improve the teaching and learning process. But when we came to Papua, we found the different context of problem of education there. The main problem is not how to improve the teaching and learning, but how to bring teacher and student to the school, because most of the school are empty. So this is the different context of education sector between Papua and other places in Indonesia. So we changed our approach. We came to the local leader and talk to them and try to find a way to increase the attendance of teacher and student in the school. So finally we come with totally different approach of the project, and also different objective of the project. In the other side of Indonesia, we focus on how to train teachers so that they can do teaching and learning better in the classroom. But in Papua, we're working with the community so that their children can go to school evenly, and also they develop regulation so that the teacher can always come to the school regularly.
There have been situations where I've had to modify my leadership style based on context or cultural perspectives. And for example, when I have worked with the youth, for me, it's been a lot about empowering young people to be involved. So there are instances, for example, where I've worked with youth where I've had to empower them. But in the same situation where I've worked with the youth on particular projects, where I've had to be more directive in that sense, vis-a-vis empowering, especially when we've had projects stalling. So providing that directive approach of saying, okay, guys, this is how we need to move. This is how we need to move forward. And that has worked in such contexts because there are situations where young people or the youth have needed that sort of directive leadership. But there are also situations whereby with the same group of people, when they've grown to a particular level and they've owned the project and they're able to move forward with it, I've been more of facilitative. So, or giving ideas, guys, have you thought about this? Maybe we can go in this way. But because they have gotten as well to a level where they're confident enough to push it forward, and all they need is different ideas or in terms of how they could push the project forward. But there have been also situations where I've worked with much older or respected people in communities where I've had to not be I may have had maybe the idea in terms of how to push it forward based on maybe the project idea or my experiences, but because of that level of respect of somebody who's been older than me in communities, I've just been there to listen much more and to facilitate the discussions so that the solutions do come from them or how you want to move forward. So it has been very different. And in terms of culturally as well, there are situations whereby I have had to, in an African context, for example, where I've had to modify my dress my dress code when I've gone to the community, because maybe you're dealing with an older generation of community members, and that level of respect between a man and woman, between an older and a younger person has been very important. So I've had to modify in terms of how I would relate to them, even if it means like using words that show respect, learning basic language so that you're able to maybe greet people in a particular way that they understand in that community. Then I've had to do that in different situations that have helped people feel that, or help people understand that I am with you and we want to achieve this together. So for me, it hasn't been, my approach has never been to force an idea down on people, but looking at a context. So what is important here? Maybe man and woman roles are very distinct and you need to follow a particular way. So I have understood that. Or for example, spending a lot of time when you walk into a meeting in the morning, discussing how your morning has gone. Did you wake up okay? Did you eat okay? Have you taken your children to school to school very okay? Then that has formed a critical bit of trying to push an agenda forward, and I've understood that because that is culturally acceptable. And there are places where I've come into meetings or I've come into a situation or a project and you move on straight to the point. So people are not interested in niceties or how you spent your weekend, get straight to the point. So I've had to, in every meeting that I've gone to, I have had to try and understand the situation before, or any project I have gone into, I've tried to understand the situation before and say, right, based on this, how is the best way to approach? And that has been very key, especially when dealing with communities from country to country. So I work, for example, quite a bit with countries in Southern Africa, and I recognize that one country in Southern Africa is very different from another country in Southern Africa. They might be lumped in the same region, but maybe what applied in Zimbabwe might not apply in Malawi at the same time. So it has been very important for me to understand the different cultural backgrounds and apply how I am going to work with them in such situations.